Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Let's Fix Stuff, Meet the Rocket Scientist podcast series. It is my pleasure to introduce a true rocket scientist in the field of medicine. But I have to say, medicine's merely a stepping stone towards becoming a rocket scientist on the inner workings of our federal government. As an orthopedic surgeon, he was on the front lines of defending our healthcare system from Hillary care during the Clinton administration. And that battle opened his eyes significantly into how government really works behind the scenes. His name is Dr. Dave Janda, and I'm honored to be able to call him my friend. Dr. Dave woke me up into how government really works. And I still remember getting writer's cramp during his presentations to my local Tea Party group. Dave's passion is prevention. He is the director and founder of the Institute for Preventative Sports Medicine based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is the only healthcare cost containment organization of its kind in North America. As befitting of a rocket scientist in his field, his academic career features many awards and distinctions, but I'd just like to highlight one distinction to help you understand the breadth of his reach. He and his book, The Awakening of a Surgeon, have been featured guests on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Plus, his research and prevention-based studies have been featured on many television, radio, newspaper, and magazine presentations. Dr. Janda currently hosts the Operation Freedom radio show, which broadcasts every Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And no matter where you live, as long as you have an internet connection, you can hear him by visiting davejanda.com and clicking the Listen Live button on the top of the homepage. No need to do that now, though. You've already clicked the right button if you're listening to this show right now. So without further ado, it's my pleasure and distinct honor to welcome Dr. Dave Janda to our Let's Fix Stuff, Meet the Rocket Scientist podcast. Welcome aboard, Dave.
Well, Pat, thanks for having me part of your great platform, and thanks for being such a great friend for so many years.
Oh, it's truly an honor to know you, my friend, and to fight these battles together. And today, we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic that gets at the heart of why we even have to fight any battles. And it gets to a response to a question that I had from a dear friend of mine a while back. And he asked a very poignant question. He goes, what is the deep state? And what specifically is the deep state? I mean, we know it's bad. We know all these, that it's something that we need to be concerned about. But what exactly is it? And so with your experience and your network that you've built over the years, I figured you'd be the ideal person to talk to about this topic. So, without going too much further on this, I was just wondering, what are your insights on what exactly is a deep state? And we're gonna unpeel this throughout the course of the broadcast, but big picture wise, what is the deep state?
Well, it's been described basically as an onion. And as you mentioned, it's multi-layered and needs to be unpeeled.
Yeah.
So my first experience.
And onions stink.
As does the deep state, right?
Yes.
And they can make you cry.
Yes, they can.
Yeah. They can make whole civilizations cry.
Yeah.
So my first experience about the deep state, and the words deep state weren't used, but let me go back. You mentioned my work in prevention.
Yeah.
And the way I got involved in healthcare policy was based on my work in prevention. Just one of our studies at the time, this was in the late 80s, the federal government analyzed our studies that we performed at the University of Michigan focusing on injury prevention and concluded that if the research findings that we had determined would be implemented across the country, nationwide, it would prevent about 1.7 million people from getting injured, save $2 billion in healthcare costs. On the series of studies of which I was the lead investigator, which those were the conclusions, we spent $1,000 once. And it got the attention of what I call, if you will, the bought off lamestream fake media. But at the time, there were still some semblances in the late 80s of honesty and integrity in the media. Not universally, but there were little pockets.
Yeah.
And some of our research started to get attention in, if you will, big platforms, TV, radio, print media. And there was an article written that then President, it was the end of his presidency, it was in 1988, President Reagan read. And I was contacted by one of President Reagan's assistants wanting to know if I would assist in healthcare policy and utilize my work in prevention to cut costs. as opposed to rationing care,
Yeah.
which insurance companies and globalists love to do
Yeah.
as a means of cutting costs, which I believe is inhumane, and as I know you do as well,
Yeah.
and unethical. The most humane and ethical means of cutting healthcare costs is preventing healthcare need. So at the time, C. Everett Koop was the Surgeon General. I went to Washington to work with the Reagan administration on healthcare policy, and in particular, my mentor was C. Everett Koop, the then Surgeon General. Another individual who was a congressman at the time who had a lot of input into the Domestic Policy Council that I worked with was Jack Kemp. And in a nutshell, we started working on means of ways, as you well know, of cutting healthcare costs. These are some of the proposals that we have proposed over the years to make healthcare more available, more affordable, more quality oriented. But as I got to Washington, there were several of us that had been brought in, and they wanted us to have, if you will, a orientation welcome.
Yeah.
So we go into this room. There were 3 or 4 of us in the room, and a representative of President Reagan's comes in and says, look, the reason why you're here is to focus on freedom, not to focus on the right-left axis. The right-left axis, the president believes, is theater.
Yeah.
It is meant to divide and conquer.
Yeah.
But the axis we want you to focus on is the up-down axis. Up being freedom and down being oppression. There are individuals, and she didn't say deep state, but she said there are individuals and there are organizations that focus on purely oppressing every American and every person of the world. And your role is to produce public policy that focuses on the upside of that bar graph, if you will, that being freedom, because in so doing, it suppresses the oppression movement.
Yeah.
And that was the first hint I had that this was not, the Washington is really not a right-left deal. This was in 1988. That there are people that are focusing on the freedom side, and there are individuals and organizations focusing on the oppression side. And when I first heard that, Pat, this was in the spring of 1988, I thought, well, this is kind of sinister, but yeah. Okay. You know, I would think everyone would be, no, it was naive, frankly. I was naive at the time.
Yeah.
And as I spoke to Surgeon General Koop and Jack Kemp and a number of other people, it became very obvious to me that yes, that there was a huge faction within and outside of government that was essentially trying to run the show, and in some respects running the show. Yeah. And they were ingrained at every level of the government, but beyond government, every level in industry, and in many other aspects of our communities and in our culture.
Yeah.
And as I started to do further investigation into this, one of the things I noticed, Pat, very early, is when we would have meetings in the White House and in other government buildings, and this was associated with healthcare policy, there was always somebody in the corner of the room taking notes. And they weren't part of the committee, or they weren't part of the group. They were always somebody extrinsic. And it turns out that I was at a meeting, and I asked one of the principals at the meeting sitting next to me, who's that in the corner? Oh, that's a Rockefeller. And on a number of occasions, the person in the corner was either a Rockefeller or someone associated with the Rockefellers. And what I had come to learn over time is that what that individual who spoke to us on that orientation meeting was speaking about this axis, freedom versus oppression, The people working on the oppression side were a number of names given to it. The New World Order crowd, the globalist syndicate, the deep state. Yeah. And the hub of the deep state, this onion as we peel it away, when you get to the core of the onion is based, if you will, on essentially families that are ingrained in the financial monetary world. So when we start hearing family names, these names kept coming up in discussions in Washington over the years. The Pesur family, which appears to be the family that has the most gravitas. Everybody talks about the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, and they are part of that inner core, if you will. But the family that tends it is the information I have that tends to, if you will, oversee everything is this Pesur family. Now, our listeners might be saying, well, wait a minute. I've heard of the Rockefellers. I've heard of the Rothschilds. But, boy, I haven't heard of the Pesur family. Bro, precisely. It's the people you don't hear about. It's kind of like Joe Biden. Yeah. Anyone who believes that if Joe Biden wins, Joe Biden will be the president and making decisions is delusional.
Right. There's a reason so many people jumped onto his bandwagon all of a sudden, right after it became clear that it was him versus Sanders.
That's exactly right.
They all want to be part of that gravy train.
They don't even have to manipulate him.
No.
Right? Because there's nothing to manipulate. It's right. Vapor. It's vapor. He's vapor. Yeah. Right? So when I say Pesur family, people should look that up. They should look up the Pesur family and what they're involved in. Actually, the better question is, what aren't they involved with?
Yeah.
Okay. They're involved in a number of the other issues and entities and silos that you and I are going to speak about today. But they're the Pesur family. Then there's the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and Lazards and the Pinkuses and the Warburgs and the Loebs. And if you want to call it a family, you can. The Vatican. Now, when I speak about the Vatican, people say, well, you're anti-Catholic. No, I'm not anti-Catholic. Oh, you're anti-Christian. No, I'm not anti-Christian. The Vatican, by that I mean the people in the power structure of the Vatican also have a seat at that inner core of the onion.
Yeah.
And out of that inner core of the onion, they utilize their financial systems that they all are integrally involved with to affect the outer cores of the onion. So when you get to the outer cores of the onion, you get to the government puppets, the Bushes, the Clintons, the Obamas, the Soroses, if you will. Everybody thinks George Soros is at the inner core of the onion. That's wrong. He's a middle-level puppet that's been put on point to direct everybody's attention to while they're working their funny business like a magician, right? Yep. Showed me the right hand, but it's the left hand that's picking your pocket. Yeah. Soros is the right hand. Okay, he's the shiny object. Oh, look at Soros. What's Soros doing? Meanwhile, they're working their deals with their left hand. So as we go through this onion, the layers comprise of what we call the bought-off lamestream fake media, the media complex, the education complex, the entertainment industry complex, the insurance industry complex, the big pharmaceutical complex, Food Incorporated, and of course the banking syndicate. Really, we talk about it being an onion in layers. It's also like an octopus. It has tentacles. And if you want to think of the 8 tentacles, think of it as the government puppets, the media, the education system, the entertainment industry, the insurance industry, big pharmaceuticals, Food Incorporated, and banking. And overseeing, they have to have a policy. They have to meld all these different layers or tentacles or layers of this onion with directives, goals, and objectives. So you hear about the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission. You know, Pat, when I started talking about this on the radio 10 years ago, everybody said, that's conspiracy theory. Yeah. These organizations don't exist. No. They are their, if you will, think tanks. They are their policy arms that integrate all the different tentacles or layers of the onion so that everybody is on the same page of the playbook.
Right.
Unless anybody thinks that this is all conspiracy theory, look, David Rockefeller, okay, who passed away and I think is living in a real hot place right now. He made the following statement, quote, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings at the Trilateral Commission and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supernatural sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries," end quote.
Oh, that's chilling.
And that pretty well outlines what the deep state is about. But if you read, one of the things I did is as I was researching this over time, David Rockefeller wrote an autobiography, and it's called Memoirs. And I take this from page 405. Quote, "Some even believe we, the Rockefellers, are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, a one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it," end quote.
Yeah, so it's really clear. I mean, this is a lot bigger than what a lot of people associate with the deep state. They see what's happening to President Trump right now. They see the moles that he has in his own administration. They see the Dr. Fauci's of the world. And they see Bill Gates trying to push vaccines on folks, and they go, well, that's the deep state. And I think you've really highlighted that this is much broader, much deeper than most people actually realize. And it touches every aspect of our life. And ultimately, they're looking for mechanisms to control people, and governments are one of the primary tools to go off and do that. The government has the power of the sword in our society to enforce specific laws. And in that vertical access you're talking about, if you want to suppress people, you got to make sure you're controlling that sword, or else people will naturally pursue freedom and try to push back up that vertical access. So I understand why a lot of the attention's in government. And I can tell you, it's not just federal government, it's not just national policies, it happens at the state level. You had your orientation session for the healthcare task force. I had mine when I first got elected into office, and I was taken to a legislative leadership program out at Michigan State University, and they proceeded to tell us all these different policy issues that were out there, and they highlighted what the acceptable solutions to all those policies were. And invariably, all those solutions were pushing down on the oppression era you were talking about, because it all involved more taxation, more regulation, and bigger government. And you've highlighted that when they start moving around their dollars through puppets like George Soros, et cetera, really all they're doing is trying to go off and make sure that they allocate those dollars in a way to reward their friends and penalize their enemies. And they are ultimately seeking control of the decisions of those folks. And if they know that they depend on them for their livelihood, whether it's at the state level or the federal level, then they know they got you. And I'll tell you, when you get a reputation for somebody that's not going to play their fiddle, you get targeted, you get diminished, you get attacked. I mean, we've had our phones tapped back at the ranch here multiple times. We've had, I was, well, I was actually challenged to a duel in the middle of caucus. So sometimes it's a physical attack as well, but it gets a little crazy sometimes. And these guys are very serious about their power base. And anybody who is pushing that up arrow towards freedom is a target. And I think you've highlighted that eloquently. And we could go into individual stovepipes and highlight what all these tentacles are, but it's important, I think, and you highlighted it. It's the financial influencers. They don't necessarily want to be in the limelight on any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. So they are very content with having somebody else serve as the front person, who then goes off and supports somebody else, like maybe an elected official who's even more of a front person, who hires certain staffers that go off and help enforce that mission. And before you know it, that's why it's called the deep state, because the folks who are really controlling things are way down many, many, many layers at the core of your onion, if you as you say. And it's really tough going off and unearthing that and bringing it to light. But the good news is, you've got shows like Operation Freedom that are bringing it to light. We've got Dave at X22 Report. We got Sean at SGT Report. There are folks, Praying Medic is going off and getting this word out. And as someone who was the actual subject of a QAnon post one day, I never thought that would happen, but they're recognized who the freedom fighters are. And I just, that's why I appreciate you even more. I mean, all the stories you're talking about here, you don't get that by just watching the news on a regular basis.
You'll never get it. You
got to experience it, and you've experienced it. So maybe let's delve into this a little bit more, into some of the other stovepipes that we were talking about, because government is first and foremost a focus for everybody, but maybe go into healthcare a little bit.
So here's the thing, in the government, and this translates, they use the same model in various silos, right? Yeah. So in government, there's something called the senior executive service, which are essentially individuals that are put in position. They are there for the duration. They serve at a level beneath the cabinet secretary and in between the implementers of policy. Yeah. So let's say in government, the Secretary of Health and Human Services says, I want to implement this policy. It goes through the next level, which is the senior executive service level, which is owned and operated by the deep state. The senior executive service level, they take that information and they're supposed to implement it. But what they do is they modify it so that it conforms with what the deep state wants, and they choke off. So they not only implement, but they choke any other approach that the secretary, if you will, a cabinet secretary, wants to implement, and they choke off the feedback loop of the people implementing it, trying to get it to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. But it's not just health, it's every government department. But it's not just government. They use this same model, Pat.
Well, wait a minute, before you get into that, because I want to get into the other models, but I'm going to give you a very tangible example of how that worked in state government. We had, right now, currently, we've got some state reps that are very freedom-minded, liberty-loving state reps that introduced a piece of legislation around prohibiting microchips being implanted into somebody as a condition of employment. Mm-hmm. And so they want to introduce a bill to go off and do just that. And, most of the bill said exactly that. It's going to prohibit it. But then most people don't realize, most legislators don't write their own bills. It goes to a legislative service bureau, i.e. your firewall that you were talking about with the middle manager. Mm-hmm. And what they did is they made sure that Sections 1, Section 2 did everything that the legislators thought it would go off and do. Section 3, however, said, oh, by the way, if a judge rules that they do need to be microchipped, that's okay. And so everything that they were told that it was all about, because they didn't bother reading the dang bills, they had their little, fail-safe valve, if you will, that got to be popped up and inserted that into the bill so that all the good stuff that it was portrayed to be actually turned out to be bad stuff. And I think that's a pretty tangible example of exactly what you're talking about. And some of this legislation, especially at the federal level, can get pretty deep.
Mm-hmm.
So I doubt these guys read the actual bills. I doubt they read Obamacare. I have, but they can play with these guys. Even good intentioned representatives can be duped by these guys because they are so subtle with how they push and pull these mechanisms of power.
And they do that in government, Pat, and then they do it in industries.
Yeah.
In every industry, whether it's big pharma or education or media with big tech or education or the food incorporated, if you will, or the insurance industry, the bank, it's all the same. It's because it works, and it has worked for many, many decades, Pat.
Yeah, AMA is a prime example of that.
Oh, absolutely.
Coding, right? I mean,
Right.
it's like, well, they're sitting there being the professors of good health and public policy. At the same time, they're making money off of these CPT codes, millions of dollars. They don't even need the membership in the AMA. They make their money off on the side here, and those what they make money off of becomes tools to the big state to go off and push further down on that arrow for everybody. So yeah, it gets interesting, and in the middle, all of us citizens are being played as pawns, right? We're a function of what information we have access to, right?
We're being played as, and here's a word I had not heard until I heard it in Washington. They refer to all of us who are not part of the elite of the globalist syndicate, the New World Order crowd, the deep state. They refer to all of us as useless eaters. I'm not kidding you.
Which is why they're into population control and stuff like that. People need to realize this is not about Republicans versus Democrats. That just harkens back to the way that George Orwell portrayed the different enemies that would play each other off, and he'd switch them off at random because they controlled the information associated with it. And all they want is conflict. All they want is an opportunity to pull different levers. They'll switch sides because they have no moral compass at all on any of this stuff, just to suit whatever their purposes are. So this is not about Republicans versus Democrats. It's not about liberals versus conservatives. This is about freedom, as you highlighted at the beginning, and oppression.
And they've also upped their game on their marketing.
Yeah.
So in the old days, by old days, I mean up until maybe the early 90s, they would utilize the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderberg Group to implement their policies. They realized, wait a minute, the public is starting to catch on.
Yeah.
So we need to wrap this manure in a nicer package that smells better, that's easier for us to market and for our puppets to market. So this is when they came up with Agenda 21, which has now been morphed into Agenda 2030, which is a globalist directive of essentially stripping people of their freedoms and their liberties and their resources and, if you will, their lives.
Yes. And I hate to admit this, but I was actually introduced to some of the folks running that show, something called the Millennium Project, which led to things like Agenda 21, and when you start reading all their objectives associated with this, it's a Marxist paradise, first of all. I mean, it's all about control. But I was on their mailing list for quite a few years. And I'll tell you, that was I essentially had a radar read on everything that they were trying to do. And that's why I got engaged in the social studies standards here in Michigan, because that's how they were trying to go off and indoctrinate our next generation of leaders, was through our education system. And all the checkpoints that they had in this Millennium Project for objectives, they were embedding into our curriculum that goes into our schools. So these guys are very well organized, and they only thrive because we, the thinking, are not being fed good information, or we're distracted with other pursuits in life.
Pat, you mentioned the M word, Marxist. If you want to look at what type of economic model that really the deep state is about,
yeah, it's
about Marxism and communism. This business about socialism is the gateway, if you will. It's more palatable.
Yeah.
They have determined socialism. So when everybody's, oh, AOC is a socialist, no, she's not. She's a communist. She's a Marxist. And you go back to our buddy David Rockefeller. He wrote this in the New York Times in an op-ed in 1973. Quote, the social experiment in China under Chairman Mao. Okay, social experiment in China under Chairman Mao. Okay. Leadership is one of the most important and successful in history, end quote. Yeah. Okay, so to this globalist and all the other deep state players and globalists, a mass murderer that wiped out at least 30 million of his own people is successful.
And you got to realize what they're doing right now in China is, I'm sure, a model for their next step on this. I mean, their social credit system that they're implementing, the crackdowns. I mean, I watch a YouTube channel called China Uncensored. I don't know if you ever come across that before. It's got a host, Chris Chappell. And if I want to find out what's going to be happening in the United States in a few years, I watch this channel on China Uncensored, because the same predecessors for some of the policies that the Chinese Communist Party is implementing in China right now find their way being implemented little by little over here in the United States. And so you're right, they've got all kinds of little experimental labs going on all across the world here. And we need to wake up, because they're trying to make America the result of that lab. Well, the reason we're in the way is because we have a place that is, first of all, based on God-given rights, not rights that they give us, right? Or can take away from us. So that alone makes us a threat, because there's a fearlessness that goes along with defending those rights that they can't deal with. I mean, that's the first target of Marxists is people of faith. And but ultimately they're after our freedom. And because they want to be, when we talk about Marxists, we talk about those useless eaters. I mean, that's the proletariat in communism, right? And so they're the Politburo. They want to be the ones pulling the strings on everything that's going on. And so, yeah, it is Marxism. Socialism's communism light, because it at least has a facade that is trying to be equal for everybody. Communism, no, there's some people that are more equal than others.
Well, and Mary Fanning and Alan Jones broke this a little over a month ago as it relates to Biden. Biden quotes Mao Zedong in one of his conference calls that he was giving, and his senior advisor, Anita Dunn, called Mao her, quote, favorite political philosopher, end quote. I mean, you know, it's not, as you said, Pat, it's not like they're hiding it.
No,
they're putting it in everybody's face.
In our social studies standards development, you know what our major issue was when we got into all these discussions? I went into this with the intent saying whatever we come up with has to be politically neutral and accurate. And I was outnumbered 20-1 by leftists in this discussion. And we carried the day and got something that was politically neutral and accurate. The one point of contention we had was on the topic of it was a term that they put into our system called core democratic values. And which, when you're trying to teach kids what it means to be an American and the purpose of education, if you look in our Constitution based on the 1787 Northwest Ordinance, which is embedded in our Michigan Constitution as well, it's that religion, morality, and knowledge being essential to good governance, education shall forever be encouraged. I mean, it's to develop good citizens. They're trying to cut that out and redefine the narrative of what these core values are. And when I pressed on them for what their core values would be, everything that they came up with was around Marxist values. I mean, the term they would use, for example, the term equality, and say, okay, I get the equality, but the way our founders put it in the Declaration was that we were all created equal. Mm-hmm. So we're all equal before the law. It doesn't mean we're going to have equal outcomes. That's what they wanted to shift the discussion to.
Right.
And it got so frustrating. So everything you're saying is so spot on, and we're seeing it in all the layers of government, whether it's our judicial system, whether or not it's our legislative system, whether it's the executive branch and all the deep layers within the agencies there. It's happening there. It's happening in our education system, our law enforcement. It's happening all across. And it's just, I in my heart of hearts, I believe that if we can get the word out and let people know what is actually happening and what's at stake, we can turn this around. But as you pointed out before, this fake news and the fake media, they control the narrative right now. We have to regain that initiative.
Well, and if you look at how, see, you're right, Pat, they're all about control. Okay,
Yeah.
so here's how they made, so people say, well, wait a minute, you know, we're talking like controlling thousands of people in different layers and all this octopus. Look, here's how they get control.
Yeah.
We talked about their policy directives that are generated through the Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, and Bilderberg Group, and networked throughout their senior executive service levels, not just in government, but across all these industries. That's one way they control everything. They also use, as we said, those senior executive service level through all these areas as choke points of feedback coming back up to maybe some people that aren't part of the syndicate,
Right.
that are, if you will, they're allowed to be there so it can make it look like everything is fine. But they also control people with funding.
Yeah.
Right? So remember, the core of the onion, the head of the octopus, is they're based in finance, they're based in banking, right? Yep. And they distribute funds to be implemented the way in which they do. So if there's something that they don't want to get funded, they don't want to see the policy implemented, it doesn't get funded.
Right.
Whether it's in the education system or the media or big tech or big pharma
or candidate for office, right?
Right? Okay, so they implement through their policies, they implement at their senior executive service level through their choke points, they implement through funding, but here's how they also implement their and control individuals. And people that might not be part of the deep state that take them on, how they try to control them. And that is through their use of illegal surveillance.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
One of the things I learned in Washington very early, in addition to the up-down axis, is Washington is all about leverage.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And as soon as they can get something on you, you are under their control. And you might not like it. You probably don't like it.
Yeah. But
one misstep, and they got you. And I'll give you another. I've said this on my platform. I haven't said it out outside of my platform, but I will here. This was in late 1988. I was walking out of a meeting at the White House with a very well-known political figure. And the political figure looked at me and said, you know, Dave, you're an honest guy. And you could have a big impact on policy, but you need to protect yourself. And he looked at me and he said, listen to me. He said, when you're in this city, he goes, you go out to eat or a ball game or a movie with whoever you want. Doesn't matter. But when you're invited to a private party, I don't care where it is. I don't care who it is, other than if the private party is at the White House. If you are invited to a private party, never go. Because you will go into that private party thinking, hey, everybody's just watching a ball game here, and there are snacks, and and then you'll notice some kids walking around. You think, well, it's kind of odd that Congressman so-and-so had his kids there, and next thing you know, Dave, you'll be drinking your Coca-Cola, and next thing you know, you'll wake up in a room somewhere and there'll be a Polaroid on your chest. And they got you.
I'm thankful that as far as I know, I got out of 8 years in the Michigan Senate without that occurrence happening. So, but I'll tell you, the surveillance was there. It was nonstop.
It's called brownstoning.
Yeah.
And
I felt like I was on the Truman Show when I ran for governor. I had a guy following me around everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm Pat, and that's only one guy you knew about.
I know.
I'm sure there was a whole army. A whole army, because you present to the public honesty and integrity. And their goal was to try to find something that they could drive into you on your honesty and integrity. They couldn't do it because you're not that kind of person, but that's what they were looking for. Yeah. And people say, well, wait a minute, how do all these people go along with this? I mean, they know it's wrong. Well, they're getting paid. For example, people say, well, wait a minute, You mean to tell me all those people that in what you call the bought off lamestream fake media, that they're just going along with this? Well, some are going along because they're leveraged.
Yeah.
And some are going along because they're getting paid a lot of money, and they know, guess what? I can't make this amount of money doing something else. And some of them are not only getting paid money, but they go, well, you know what? I'm willing to go along with it. I mean, Pat, when Obamacare came out, and you and I discussed it at the time,
yeah,
it was the most unethical and inhumane piece of legislation that I had seen. I think you had seen.
And it has nothing to do with healthcare, everything to do with control.
That's right. And I took the analysis because, as you well know, half of Obamacare was hidden in the stimulus bill. Yeah. That's where the rationing boards and the enforcement boards were. I took that to all the media contacts that I had developed over many years' time,
yeah,
in all the networks, major newspapers, radio, and I sent them my analysis. And the feedback I got was, Dave, your analysis is, well, we can't tear it apart. It's solid. But we also can't present this to the public. They know exactly what they're doing and what they're not doing. And they are willfully complicit in the deep state's agenda of stripping freedom and liberty from every American and every person of the world. That's why people say to me, Pat, Dave, you're really intolerant of all those people in what's called some people outside the window in the People's Republic of Ann Arbor still call the mainstream media. You're really intolerant of them, and you're intolerant of a lot of business leaders, and you're intolerant of a lot of people in government. That's right. I'm intolerant of them because I know that they know what they're doing,
yep,
and the harm that they're causing. Yet they continue to do it for money, to protect themselves, or just because it's easier to go along with the syndicate, yep, than it is to call the syndicate out. Let's face it, Pat, if you and I were playing for the syndicate, our platforms would be 100 times the size.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. We'll get there. Don't worry, we'll get there. Because
well, I don't know if we will get there, but here's what we do. What I do know: you and Dave Janda will never compromise to the deep state, and our goal is that the deep state be defeated,
yep,
which ultimately will make our lives easier and every American's freedom more enhanced. And if you want an example of what the deep state will do to somebody, there's plenty of examples. Yeah. But just look at General Flynn and look at his family.
Yeah. Or look at my friend Phil Haney.
Phil Haney, formerly Walking the Earth, Phil Haney.
Yeah. No, these guys are serious. So, and Let's Fix Stuff, we're all about fixing stuff. So what do you think we can do? What do you think are some practical steps that you and I can take, as well as the folks who are listening to this podcast? I mean, I know I'm asking a huge.
Here's the big thing all of us can do. Don't keep our mouths shut about it. You see, that's what they're counting on.
Yes.
One of their control mechanisms is fear and chaos.
Yep.
We see this with COVID.
You see it in our Michigan legislature right now. They should be impeaching our governor for her unlawful actions, yet they're sitting there, and when you ask them what's going on here, it's the reason they're not doing anything is because of fear.
And they use fear to choke freedom.
Yeah.
Period. So the single greatest thing every one of our listeners can do is network this information that we're providing to every one of their family members, coworkers, neighbors, acquaintances, friends, family. Now look, here's where people have a problem. They say, well, I think I might get some blowback. Okay.
Yeah.
Show them this interview. Go to the stuff on your site, Pat, on my site, and let us be the bad guys.
Yeah.
Okay? Let us be the guys telling people, here it is. But the single greatest thing people can do is network information about the truth. Because the deep state, the globalist syndicate, the New World Order crowd, they want everything hidden in the darkness.
Absolutely.
So that's number one. And that's a big number one.
Yep.
You get millions of people out there talking about this. This will paralyze the deep state. Here's what they don't want people to do.
We prefer darkness. We prefer light. It's pretty simple.
The numbers
Yep.
are drastically in the freedom side's family.
Yes, absolutely.
There are whether 329 million people in the United States. All right, how many deep state players are there? Yeah, with ties to the deep state and know what's really going on? I don't know. Let's say 100,000. Okay, 100,000 versus 328,900,000.
Yep.
We got the numbers.
Right.
They know we have the numbers.
Which is why they try to keep us at each other and polarize us so that we're at a 50-50 resolution, because they play all these games with the media on it. But really, if we actually took back and pulled back the curtain on the Wizard of Oz here, we'd understand that, no, actually, we got a little bit more chutzpah than he does. If we actually go off and assert it and know about it. It's like a little lion cub that wakes up in a brood of, ducklings or whatever. I don't know what an analogy is, but the idea is when he wakes up and realizes, no, guy, he's the lion. He's the one that's in control of this, and the whole time he's just got to realize that he's the one in control. That's what they're trying to do to us right now. Is trying to deny us of that freedom and realizing that we're the ones in control of that freedom.
The other way, the way we bring them down, is not only networking information amongst all of us, and continually, not just once, to be a broken record.
Yeah,
But the other side of this, Pat, is to knock them down, to knock them out. What we have to do is we have to address their funding mechanisms.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Now, this is exactly, look, ISIS is a branch out of the deep state, owned and operated, run actually, unfortunately, through the United States, through our intelligence agencies, and a number of other intelligence agencies around the world. When Trump went after ISIS, what did he do? He went after the oil that they were selling for funding.
Yeah. That
our intelligence agencies allowed them to do.
Yeah.
Once he took away their oil.
I still remember that one track where Obama was in there, where they had a caravan of gas trucks, and they had them in their sights. They're ready to take them out. They knew they were ISIS convoy, and Obama said, nope, leave them alone.
So he went after their funding mechanism, and in so doing, he starved them out.
Yeah.
Their food supplies, their water supplies, their weapon supplies, all dried up because they had nothing to buy it with. Okay, so the same is true with the deep state.
Yeah.
Let's look at their funding mechanisms. Number one, they use the central banking fiat, nothing backing its system to launder their money, to get their interest on the money that they create. So one way to help bring down the deep state is addressing the banking industry, and in particular, the central banking system. Now, some people might say, well, I can see how President Trump can do that. He puts people on the Federal Reserve Board like Judy Shelton, who he recently did, who he had nominated, who's big into hard currencies, gold and silver, and against paper money that has no backing to it and has spoken against the Federal Reserve System. Yeah, so he's doing his part. So what can we do on a local level? Well, one thing that we can do is, if you look at the big banks that are supporting the Federal Reserve System, the JP Morgan Chases, the Bank of Americas, the Wells Fargos, this Citigroup, Citicorp Group, if you take your money out of there and you put them into small banks, Citibanks, savings and loans, credit unions, regional banking system, rather than the big monsters, that's one way of making a stand.
Yeah.
The other way is to protect yourself and rather than playing around in the paper markets, is making sure to have an insurance policy for yourself and your own family, and that's with precious metals, with gold and silver.
And stay out of debt. Yeah,
and stay out of debt, because the way they can help control people is through DEBT, through their debt system, of which the central banking system of creating money is a debt-based system.
Yeah.
It's a Ponzi system. So let's go after their funding. Okay, the president's doing that by putting people like Judy Shelton on there. We can do that locally by moving our money around, not going into debt, not playing in the paper markets. What else? One of their huge revenue sources is human trafficking. Well, who is the one president, at least in my lifetime, who's spoken repeatedly about human trafficking and going after the human trafficking? Is President Trump.
Yeah.
Because it also is part of their control mechanism when it comes to kids. So what can we do about it? Look, as parents, as uncles, as aunts, as grandparents, if we should be going to our school boards and to our local police departments and to our mayor's offices and saying, look, I'm aware that human trafficking is occurring. What can I do to help in our community make a difference to stop this?
Yeah, our church at Northridge would go around to the local motels and hotels in the area and put out little, they'd have little bars of soap that would have an 800 number, because sometimes they, if their handlers saw the number out or any paraphernalia or materials out in the room, they immediately get rid of it. But if you put it in a bar of soap that they see in the shower, it's a little bit more difficult to get access to it. So yeah, there's some practical things we can do. So I think we're getting close to running out of time here. So I just want to kind of wrap this up a little bit. And we didn't even orchestrate this at all, but you came to two conclusions that from my experience serving in the state legislature, I think are spot on. And there's two key areas that we need to focus on. One is the information war, and the second is the financial war. Mm-hmm. And you've nailed it. You've taken your steps and you've invested all your time. You've retired now from being a full-time orthopedic surgeon. You're focused on getting this information out to people through Operation Freedom. And everybody, just for a reminder, go to davejanda.com. And in addition to the website, he's got the radio show Operation Freedom, which tells you where his heart is. It's 2 to 5 every Sunday on WAAM radio. But you can get to a quick link on Dave's website. And I also believe that the funding, there's also an incumbent dependency upon people to put their money where their mouth is. And from a political perspective and political advocacy, I recognize the fact that they've only got 100,000 people on their side and we've got millions on our side. Mm-hmm. So we don't need people that can write $10,000, $20,000, $2 million checks on our side, but we do need to start realizing that we need to be able to invest in freedom and those who are fighting for freedom that are out there. And so I formed, from a political perspective, an organization called the Michigan Grassroots Alliance. It's also called the Rocket Fuel Fund. And what we're trying to do is build a whole network of PACs that can actually start funding freedom-oriented candidates. And if you want to find out more about that, go to migrassrootsalliance.org or just go to one of our PACs that are set up, principledleadershippac.org, and just start putting in $10 a month, $20 a month towards seeding a fund that can be used to put towards candidates that are fighting for freedom. And I'm telling you right now, I've got good freedom fighters that made it through their primary elections. It's against all odds. The whole establishment was against them. This whole deep state apparatus was against them. They made it through. Now they're being cut off at the spigot by the folks that are supposed to be on their side politically. And so these people still need our support. So remember, hundreds of millions of people versus 100,000 people. If our hundreds of millions just started forking over the price of a Starbucks coffee a month, we can actually start making a dent into these policy decisions to start cutting the strings of these puppets at the government level. So that's something I'm a big advocate of. Also, go off and support David on his thread with davejanda.com, and get out supporting there. And also, we'd appreciate your support out at the Right Stuff Club here and Let's Fix Stuff. But it's combination info war and financial war. And I think you nailed it. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on today and lending us your vast experience. And, you know, they didn't know what they were dealing with when they put an orthopedic surgeon, somebody who could actually think in that environment and think critically. And I just want to say, for all the rest of us freedom fighters out there, we are so blessed to have you in the middle of the fight, my friend.
Well, thank you, Pat. Coming from you, that's quite a compliment. I'd like to thank you for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. You have been a breath of fresh air in a less than sea of tranquility when it comes to politics. And I thank you, because you have taken an immense amount of grief for years on behalf of every person, not just of our state, but of our country. You know, because people were watching you, and you inspired many people in government to do the right thing and to do the thing that was needed for the people and their freedom. And, you know, obviously I would have preferred that you would be in the governor's chair right now, because I think I know our state would be a drastically different situation than it is right now.
Well, I think the point of encouragement from all this is that we need more people just standing up. I mean, and when you do, there is a ripple effect. When you throw that rock into the pond, those ripples impact other people. So you may not see the benefits of what you did during your tenure. And sometimes, I mean, it's tough when I look back in the rearview mirror and all the stuff we did. I did everything I think I was called to go off and do, and we're still doing more, just like you are right now with Operation Freedom. But I'm looking for the next David to stand up. I'm looking for people to make that difference. And you don't have to be a multimillionaire to do this. You don't have to own your own business. You can be somebody like Carl Mankey, owning a barber shop out in Owasso, Michigan, taking a stand for freedom. You can be somebody like Richard Frisky out of Frisky Orchards up in the UP, saying, no, Governor Whitmer, you don't dictate the policy that governs my business here. My customers do. Or you can be brave pastors like John MacArthur out in California, saying no to him being silenced. All of us have a role to play on it. I'm so thankful for your role in this throughout all the years, and for lighting that fire inside of me at all those Tea Party meetings where I got writer's cramp. So thank you very much, my friend Dave. And remember, go to davejanda.com. Chime in and into his radio show every Sunday on from 2 to 5 p.m. and you can click on the link at davejanda.com. Thank you, my friend. God bless everybody. And remember, don't just listen to these podcasts. Take action. That's where we're going to make a difference. God bless everyone.